Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions, where we are critical, not cynical, of the music we listen to. I'm your host, Bryan. We're going to do a special selection here, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you have your own suggestion you'd like to put forward to the program, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's comes at us from Jens, Red Sparrows, as each end looms and subsides. No context. Let's just dive into this. I think we've listened to Red Sparrows before. I do know this is an instrumental, but that is the only thing I know going into this. So let's dive into the track and see what Red Sparrows is bringing to the table today. Alright, so we're going full on atmosphere right here. Nothing really musical yet, just textures. Really fun rhythmic modulation going on. With that lower note, it was fast. It was slow before that. We're going back to the slow. Just the theme right here is a fluctuation. We have sounds moving from left to right. The sounds themselves are changing speed and frequency. We've introduced a guitar. We have a musical aspect coming in now. I wonder if the atmospheric part is going to fade out completely or if it's going to continue to be a part of the sounds. Really beautiful. We have this moving line. Violin over here just doing these suspended notes, and every once in a while, the bass. Right there in the middle channel. The violin, interestingly, sounds very stretched and wide, almost like it's underwater. It's providing a really nice texture against that clean guitar over there on the other side. Small tempo increase, about 5 BPM, maybe 10 BPM. Just enough to give it a little kick of energy. Our right guitar has shifted to tremolo picking. I don't really hear any attacks, but I do hear a constantness. Here we go again, some of that production fluctuation. And the rumbles come back. Interesting to hear those textual elements kind of existing as transitions into the musical parts. I wonder if that's going to continue on through the rest of this track. Use of dissonance there on the left guitar. I don't know if this is counterpoint or if we just have a lot of moving lines going on. It's interesting that this big moment almost feels relaxing. There's comfort in this power. Slight accelerando there at the ends. Interesting how much power the percussion has over the time feeling. The rest of the band didn't really change what they were doing much at all. But yet it felt like we slowed down on time. This is just a really strong push forward. Just strong sense of direction, momentum. What? I want to back that up just once. I was going to make a comment about the drum production and placement, and you guys have to hear this for you to understand what I'm talking about. But the tom hits and even the snare hit a little bit. They're pushed out far to both sides. A lot of drumming, even the drumming we heard throughout the rest of this track, has been very centered. That's just a typical place to position the drums in the production. But here it's pushed out to the sides, but not just one or the other, which would be typical for especially the toms. When we talk about drum production, a lot of the times as the drummer goes across the drum kit, they'll also move across the panning. Not entirely like this. This is really pushing it to the extremes, but you'll have movement in the drums based on their position, sometimes to the listener, sometimes to the drummer. It's actually a really neat thing. Sometimes when they run down the toms, it actually moves to the left, and other times it moves to the right. Just depends on if the producer positioned them based on whether you're the audience looking at the drummer, in which typically your snare's on your right, and your toms go to the left, or if you're the drummer, where your snare is on your left and the toms go to the right. Anyways, just listen to the placement of these tom hits here. Just way out there. Yeah, something I noticed that time through that I didn't pick up on previous time was the snare felt like it was in my head or maybe behind me. I don't know. It didn't feel like I didn't get that anywhere else through the track. It felt like the drums were in front of me, but there it's just kind of compressed. What would this be? The y-axis? It's not in front of me or behind me. It's within me. This entire spectrum has been shrunk. Um, yeah, just what a wild track. And this is going to be something. It's interesting. I talk about songs that I have a hard time getting a full read on them when they're super long, and I tend to have more of a surface analysis on them just because there's so much music that I would have to remember. Other times, though, I talk about songs that are short but dense, and I think that's where this lands. As far as 7 minutes goes, there's not a lot going on here. There's two sections. The third one kind of evolves into a third, and then there's our intro and our textural transition. Not a lot of stuff going on, at least not as far as my mind goes. Like five pieces where two of them are shorter. I can kind of keep most of that in my head. But there's so much going on. It's such a dense track that it was really hard for me to get in a really strong emotional read on this song as a whole. I pointed out in each second, this one reminds me of this one, this one reminds me of this makes me feel this way. But I mean, I don't really see how a lot of it connects. And I'm trying to lean into this as each end looms and subsides idea. It makes me think of threads of fate. Um, but then like the ending is just like super tense and it ends on a crack. A snare, actually, a very strong snare hit. Might have been a flam as well, which is both sticks hitting the snare at the same time. Just because it's very loud pop to it. But like, what does that mean, and how does that tie into where we came from? This is not a song I think you can get on a first listen, but I'm gonna give it my best. So let's dive into this. Wait, that's what I say when we start the song. Let's get into some analysis. Let's talk about some music here. So it starts out with ambient sounds, just this low rumble where the space between each rumble, each crackle, is constantly in flux. It's just always shifting. We also have this just ambient tone. It's not really there's no grit to it. It's just a pitch that just kind of exists and it fluctuates from side to side. And then there's something over here. I can't remember what it was. There's just layers of these atmospheric tones. And there's nothing musical going on. Intended. I can't even say that. There's nothing traditionally musical going on here. We don't have melody or harmony. There is a rhythm, but there's not a core pulse. It's just sounds. It's just noise, basically, in flux. And I really wanted to point that out when we were listening to it. This entire section is in flux. This lower, bassier tone, the frequency of its pulses changes constantly. Our left tone pulses left and right. There's just movement in every aspect. Not a single component of this opening atmospheric section is static. There is always a type of movement, something in motion, something changing about it. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know what it means. I really don't. But it's a fascinating way to craft a section. I mean, when we think about making a metal song or a rock song, even, um, or a pop song, or whatever, a mainstream style song, we think about a foundation. Maybe we have guitar chords, or maybe we have the notes of the chord running up and down. Um, and then you have a melody line and maybe a counterpoint and maybe a nice ornamental thing around that and a drum part. But especially for mainstream music, we think of loops, we think of repetitions. We can call them in the guitar world riffs. In the drum world, we call them patterns. In classical, we call them ostinatos. But it's the idea of taking a 2 or 4 bar phrase and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And a lot of mainstream music is based off of this. The words might change in a vocal line, but the vocal melody doesn't. The guitar riff continues on and on and on until we get to our next section when we move to the chorus and we get a new riff that does the same thing. It's still a loop, it's just a different loop. This idea of every single thing being linear but the same is wild. And I'm thinking about this entirely electronic because a lot of these sounds sound electronic to me, but just imagine playing this live if it isn't automated already and just constantly tweaking dials to adjust frequencies or ranges or spikes or peaks or however you manipulate waves, sine waves and cosine waves. I honestly, electronic music is just so far outside of my expertise, but just always making these micro adjustments to make sure that every single line is constantly changing in some facet of itself, um, but never changing the sound. The forest is in fluctuation, or sorry, the trees are in fluctuation, but the forest still looks like a forest if you're not paying attention specifically to a single tree. You still just see bark and leaves. It's kind of weird. The minutia changes, but the larger picture doesn't. I don't know. That opening's got me feeling away, and I don't have words to put it into. Which reminds me that this is a track that needs an emotional listen. This is not something that I think is going to do well with screw. I mean, there are really cool things that are going on in here. And I pointed out a lot of them during the reaction, but it's definitely a feeling song, a journey song. Close your eyes, go with the flow kind of vibe. We get out of this section and we go to our first musical section, and it kind of fades in on top of our what did I call that? Atmospheric section. We have a violin that sounds like it's underwater, just really blurry and stretched and reverbery, and it's just playing these suspended notes, like whole notes. One note per bar kind of idea. We have a guitar over here that's doing some lines, I think. I can't remember if it was lines or chords. I think it was a moving line. Not chords, because the only thing suspended was our violin. And we have a bass that comes in intermittently and lays down this nice punctuation at the end of a 4 bar phrase. And we do this for a while. A static component on top of what I think I still remember is at least the rumble from our atmospheric section, but I don't remember hearing the alarm or anything like shifting sides or anything like that. We had reached a point of, well, static. That's the perfect word for it. The opposite of fluctuation, where everything was changing before. We have reached a state of stagnancy, of singularity. The music has one idea, and we repeat it over and over and over. Nothing changes about the timbres of these instruments or, what effects are put on them, their panning, their placement. And then we get a melody guitar on top of all this. Real beautiful stuff. But not like a sad beauty or not even sad. Again, there's so many really interesting emotions that they go through on this one, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to speak about what exactly I felt. But the song put me in a mindset. It had me going through some really interesting feelings. Um, but yeah, just a ton of moving parts going on here. We have the bass line that comes up every once in a while, the moving line on the right with our guitar. We have a center melody, and it's just this really beautiful concept of almost like a clock. Lots of moving gears. And if you look at each of them individually, you can appreciate what they're doing on their own, but it really shines when you hear them all together and you forget about the individual aspects of it. Which kind of lines up with the opening. If you look at all the individual aspects, all the individual changes, the micro changes going on, it seems like a lot, but when you just listen to it as a whole, it is one atmosphere with a single emotion, and it really shines through everything working together. I don't know if that's going to be a thread I can keep pulling on, but we'll see where it goes. After this, we entered into another atmospheric section. And honestly, I don't remember this one much at all. It was just a transition. It was sort of here for like 8 bars or something, maybe even if that. Brought back some of the same sounds. I remember we had that really low rumbly bass tone. The violin was back. But its purpose, at least for me, is to pull us into the next section, which started out slow again and built up and continued to build up through layers, sounds, and including new textures. We had this really nice, faster moving idea over on the left with an acoustic guitar and a violin, I think. Um, and what was neat was that every once in a while, we would have this really dissonant string of eighth notes, 4 of them back to back, that just put a lot of bite into the song where most everything else is consonant. There is this general palatable beauty to everything. And here we introduce some distress to it. And this was the first notion that there's something underneath the surface. This this dissonance continues to get leaned into. More and more elements of the track begin to introduce concepts of dissonance. It becomes a texture that you can't ignore anymore. As we include more and more layers, the drums shift in a couple of subtle ways. Well, the first one, not so subtle. We shift to a halftime feel, which makes the song feel like it drags. It is wild how much power the drums have over the time feel of this track. And primarily that's because there weren't many moving parts at the moment, so the drums were the only driving aspect, and when they stopped driving, it felt like we stopped. But they work back up and bring us back to speed not too long after. Again, it's a very short, like intermission type thing. I don't know how it fits into the larger idea, but I have to believe that Red Sparrows, much like with the second atmospheric section, put it there for a reason. It's part of the storytelling. Its shortness is by design because of what it's supposed to represent in the larger artwork. But the drums get right back up to pace after like 4 bars maybe, and actually we get a tempo shift as well. We don't just run back up to where we were, moving from halftime to double time, but we actually boost up another 5 to 10 BPMs, which is actually the second time that the song does this. It is a subtle shift, but if you're really looking for the time feel, you're gonna notice the discrepancy. It speeds up just a hair. And the thing is that your average person isn't going to hear it. But what it does do, and what your average person will feel, is the electricity of it. This is a common tool that's utilized in a lot of pop music, moving from verse to chorus, 2, 3, 5 BPM, small amounts, but just enough to give it that extra kick. So we get a couple of those, and this takes us into the final part of the track where we almost enter into a sort of march. The cymbals are rarely utilized on the drums, and we have a large usage of the toms and the snares while everybody else is laying down this very rigid quarter note pulse. And this is where I mentioned that the song has direction, momentum. It is single-minded, very focused at this point. This is a huge departure from everything else, which feels like it just meanders, especially with the drums' fluidity. I mean, just prior to this, we were talking about going faster and then slowing down to nothing and then speeding back up a little faster, even where we were. Just within, 8 bars, we had all that. The rest of the song is doing its own thing, and are doing their own thing as a whole. And the drums are just kind of whatever feels right. They feel lost, actually, like they can't find their place in the song at that moment. But even prior to that, everything is just about this, I don't know, just being in the moment, the atmosphere of it all, making each section have its emotional resonance. But here there is direction, there is flow, there is a very strong sense of time feel. There's purpose that has been found in whatever the song is personifying at this moment. I find it interesting that as soon as the song finds something to work towards and provides that momentum to get there, it ends abruptly. Just bah! And that's it. Small little resonance off of that final snare crack, but that's it. There's no fade out. None of the other instruments are allowed to resonate and fade as they would. It is abruptly stopped. I don't know what it all means though. Like I said, I have an understanding of what each section is doing. And it's a fascinating journey to be on for sure. I enjoyed every moment I was in this. But I don't know how it all connects, what it all could mean on a larger scale. The title of the song is just as cryptic: as each end looms and subsides. I mean, this could talk about anything. Anything with two ends. Hmm. I don't know. I have praise for everything else about the song, though. The production is really well done. It's playful in some areas, very rigid in others. It's very clear. I could hear everything. Um, and all of the musical components are well done. The performative side of the instruments, I actually don't know now that I think about it if this is performed or digital. I suppose it could be either. But at the end of the day, the song makes me want to listen to it again. There is something here that it, like I said, it makes me feel a way. I don't know what way that is, but not many other songs have done that, put me in this mindset. I have to listen to it again. Those are my thoughts on As Each End Looms and Subsides by Red Sparrows. So where you guys come in, hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I stated, or correct me on. Above the comment section is a description box. In there you'll find a link to Linktree, which takes you to this menu. Has links for everything related to the channel, such as multiple ways to support the channel. You can pick up merch, join Patreon, vote on future themes, submit your own special selections. You can also find links to the various communities around the channel, like Twitter and Discord. Why do I always want to say Twitch there? Above the description box, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of album closers and check out a creator request, where a smaller band gets in contact with me and asks me to check out their stuff. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.